Welcome to the Power of Purity podcast, the show that empowers men to experience their sexual gift in a healthier way. Now here's your host, Tony Ingracia.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Power of Purity podcast. I really appreciate you being here today with me, and I have no doubt that you're going to be blessed by today's interview. If you were with me the past 2 weeks, you know that I interviewed Jay Pyatt, and Jay has a ministry where he helps men who are struggling with sexual issues, porn addiction, sex addiction, and this ministry was born out of the deepest brokenness of Jay's own heart and life and story. And he has a website called porniskillingme.com, so I encourage you to check out his website. And I'm so excited because today and in next week's episode, I'm going to have the opportunity to talk with Jay's wife, who is Lori Pyatt. So let me just start by saying hi, Lori.
Hello, thank you so much for having me.
I'm so excited to have you here and to hear your story. It was such a blessing to talk with Jay last week, and I know that his story is going to be a blessing to so many people, and I think it's an unusual opportunity to be able to talk to his wife in the next 2 episodes, you know?
Yeah.
So that's great. And before we start, can I just ask you to tell us a little bit about yourself, Lori? You know, where do you guys live again?
We live in Southwest Michigan.
And what do you do? Do you have kids?
Yeah, we have one child. She's 32, 31 right now. 31.
Okay.
Try to make her older than she is. She lives several states away, living her life. She's an artist. What do? I work full-time at this ministry, helping women and couples recover from porn addiction, sex addiction, that sort of thing. And besides that, I like home remodeling and photography. So that's the basics in a nutshell.
Wonderful. My wife is a photographer.
Oh, nice.
She used to have her own photography business, but she doesn't anymore. She doesn't like the pressure of owning a business and the responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
So she's what they call a second shooter. She has a good friend, and this friend calls upon her for weddings when she needs a second shooter. And so Sherry loves photography. And so you use mostly digital, I guess, today in this day and age, right?
Yeah, I do. And I need that. I need about 100 shots of one scene to get a good one. So.
And do you do it professionally or just kind of a hobby?
Just a hobby. Yeah, I might give a friend a pack of note cards that, or have photography on them, but haven't ventured out into doing this as a business yet.
Well, that sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, let me read just a little vignette when I did a little bit of research on Jay and Lori Pyatt. I found this little vignette here that introduces you, and it's entitled Our Story. And it says, Porn nearly destroyed us several times, but it was made worse by his lies and near affairs, his diminished ability to treat me well, and the hurtful things he'd say during our talks. All of it was so crushing, I almost gave up. But I'm glad I didn't, because my husband's been clean since 2010, and he's made me his one and only. I trust him now, and we did this without splitting up. It was all worth it, but we only got here by taking a new path, and now we help others find their way out too.
Yes.
So praise be to God for that story and that testimony, Lori. So we heard Jay's story last week. I'm wondering if you could kind of share the story from your point of view and how everything went for you and how you experienced this difficult marriage and your husband's sexual addiction.
Right. Well, my story starts a few years before we got married, when I met God in a more personal way. I had been raised in the church, but met him much more personally around the age of 20. And after that, it was kind of just me and him. I was had sworn off dating for a bit, but a couple years into it, I asked God, what's my purpose in life? And I felt him say very, very clearly, your purpose in life is to have a great marriage and to help other people do the same.
Wow.
was like, okay, well, that fits. It seems like that's something I would like to do, because I'd always been into like communication and relationship, healing and that sort of thing. So it really fit. I met Jay when I was, I was 24, and almost immediately he told me he had an issue with porn. Well, I had been cheated on in a former relationship, and I was like, nope, not doing that, So we dated for a bit, but when he started asking me about marriage and talking about marriage, I was very hesitant to take that leap, because I always thought, porn was, something in me knew porn could lead to an affair. And I think a lot of women kind of feel that way too.
Makes sense to me. That makes total sense, yeah.
Yeah, because it's not fulfilling. There's biological reasons for that, but it's not fulfilling. So when he started talking marriage, we had gotten into the relationship enough that I did debate, do I do this, do I not? Talked to my spiritual mentors, prayed about it, and all the spiritual mentors were saying, like, I think God's in this. I think God's doing something here. So seriously consider marrying him. And had a couple of somewhat miraculous signs from God that said, okay, all signs seem to be pointing here. I knew that I had a guy who was trying to fight it, and who was, being honest about it, and who was willing to talk about it. And I thought, if we can talk about it, then we can get through anything. And I realized, at the very least, if this doesn't work out, I will have to face my fears of winding up abandoned and alone. Cheated on, winding up abandoned and alone. So I took that leap of faith, and immediately we started fighting about it. Within the first 6 months, we had a fight probably every third night,
And by that, do you mean the first 6 months of the marriage, once you guys got married?
Yeah. The funny thing was, at 6 months, I was just like, I've got to get a handle on things. So they put me on Prozac to help with depression and anxiety and that sort of thing. And our fights dropped off immediately. And I kind of went into this numb phase for the next year and a half, until about 2 years into marriage. But the interesting thing is, once we stopped fighting about it, Jay started having interest in other women at work.
Wow.
So I didn't know about that till years later. The confessions, or not really even confessions, he's confessed once on his own. Otherwise, it was me asking and asking, or finding it. The first time I found it, I think that was 18 months in. And then about year 2, I felt like something was still off. And so I'd ask him about it, and he would answer, and I was like, I don't know, something still feels off. So I kept asking him, and finally he confessed that he hadn't quit. And then he added something to it. Okay, now I'll meet with a pastor or a men's group. And then around year 3, same thing. Around year 5, he came home from a big experiential retreat weekend and confessed. And then the next night, he confessed that he had been interested in women at every single place that he worked. And each time, though, it progressed. At first, it was just pictures, and then it was video, and then it was this, and then it was this, and then,
With these women that he was, in a sense, flirting with or interested in?
No, not necessarily, because there wasn't much interaction. He basically says he was an affair waiting to happen. And if these women had been interested in him, or had shown signs back to him, then there probably would have been, something that happened.
I see.
And by the time it had progressed so much, by year 15-ish, we, he had gotten to the point where somebody did express interest, and he was like, oh my gosh, this is too much, this is really dangerous. And then he stopped, because she was calling him back and trying to get personal and that sort of thing. So
wow.
At year 11, he stopped meeting with his accountability partnership, because it kind of fell apart, or they just stopped meeting. And one of the guys, the leader, had done this thing where he would give a commitment to his wife in the morning, and then weigh in on it at night. And so he said, now that my accountability partnership isn't meeting anymore, I'm going to make you my accountability partner. I'll make a commitment in the morning, and then at night I'll let you know what has happened. And so for 4 years, he was lying to me. It worked for the first 2 years. Then for 4 years, he was lying to me, and to the point where I was like, I don't think you have to call this your problem anymore. At that point, there was a sexual addiction study that I think it was the American Psychological Association or some nationwide psychological association did that looked at both guys in the church and out of the church about porn addiction and that sort of thing. And the statistic back then was like 80 to 90% of the guys had a habit of this sort of thing, is what my therapist told me.
Wow.
And so I was telling him, you're like one of the top 10 or 20% of the guys. You've kicked this, and this is your issue. This is your addiction. So I'm really proud of you.
Boy, he really had the wool pulled over your eyes. I mean, he was living in duplicity. Mm-hmm. He was living in deceit and lies.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
He was really in the darkness, and you think he's in the light.
Yes. And I was completely duped, So at some point in there, it started feeling off again. And I can remember sitting in the gardening section of Target. It was summertime, and they had their chairs out and their lawn equipment. I just remember sitting on the stack of chairs just going, I don't know. I think maybe he's fallen off the wagon the last few months because it's just felt weird. And I said, I don't know what I'm going to do. And she says, you're going to do what you always do. You're going to seek out God, and you're going to ask Jay what's been going on. This time I did it differently, though. I brought this, it used to be this thing online. They've taken it down, but it was this tool that really kind of gets to the heart of things. And so I filled that out, and I brought it to him, and I basically said, this is what's going to happen if you cooperate. This is what's going to happen if not. These are the signs I've seen. These are the feelings I get. And laid it all out for him. And he said, give me 24 hours. And I said, I can do that. So the 24 hours passed, and he came back and he said, actually, at that point, in the interim, I had written in a journal, God, I hope we can talk about it now, because we hadn't. Remember, I got married thinking if we can talk about it, we can get through anything.
Right.
But immediately we couldn't. I mean, his defensiveness, blame shifting, deflection, all that, he would easily turn it around on me to where I was going, oh, I need to clean this up and get right on that.
Gaslighting.
Yep. So we took the 24 hours, and I was praying, God, I hope we can get through it this time. I hope we can talk about it now. And we sat down, and he said, you're right and you're wrong. And I was like, oh, here we go. And he had that stiffness to him, that, just itching to fight kind of feel to him. And then within the first 10 phrases, 5 or 10 phrases, he said probably the most hurtful part, and that is, I turned back to porn because you don't look like that, and you don't put yourself out there like that. And that just gutted me.
In other words, it's your fault.
It's my fault, and it had to do with the way I looked.
Yeah, you're not pretty enough, you're not sexy enough, you don't look like these porn stars. Wow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I was like, okay, I need 3 days. And I got on my face before God, and I said, God, if I'm going to do this, I've got to do it differently. I've got to do this differently, because I tried, I'd heard the messages from the church, have more faith, have more sex with your husband. I'd tried that. And I'd heard the messages from counseling saying, work on your codependency. I'd tried that. And those had worked in other areas of my life. Like working on my codependency really worked in my relationship with my daughter and my parents and my siblings and, coworkers and that sort of thing. But it didn't work here. In fact, just looking at just those things gave me a marriage that was on the brink of divorce at that point. It basically enabled him to continue to pull the wool over my eyes and continue to act out, because I'd gotten so used to, it's my fault, so work on my stuff. and it was so painful. Yes, I'm going to work on my stuff. Of course I am. But I had done that for 15 years and still had a marriage on the brink of divorce and still had a husband who was acting out. So I said, God, I've got to do this differently. And I felt like I got the green light. And so the next 2.5 to 3 years were a lot of research and figuring out the next stage in our growth, like what new tools can we throw at our latest problem. And I'm a firm believer that every relationship has like, I don't know, about 7 to 10 major issues. So one by one, we started working on our major issues, and we would, I again would research to find a new set of tools to throw at the problem, and that would work for a while, and then they'd stop working. And I'm like, God, I've done everything I can. Either you're going to save this, or we got to split. And then God would come through with the tool that would help that problem. And then we'd kind of go on this honeymoon period, and the whole cycle would start again, where I'd research it, hit a wall, throw up my hands, and then God would come through literally within a couple hours or a couple days.
Am I understanding that these issues at this point aren't necessarily around the issue of sex and porn and sex addiction? It's other issues, relational issues and dynamics in the context of the marriage.
Yeah, the relational trauma that happened, the relational betrayal, anger issues, his explosiveness was definitely an issue, communication problems. I remember it took 14 tries because it's not like, oh, here's another issue. It's like, okay, what's going on now? What is happening now? Why aren't we able, what's the issue now? And this one time I narrowed it down to communication issues. And I was like, Jay has an issue communicating. Like there are problems with his ability to communicate. And it took 14 tries to get him to understand, this is what I'm trying to talk about. I'm trying to talk about you have issues communicating.
He just couldn't get that? He didn't see it? Or was he just pushing you away, like he didn't want to talk about it?
I don't think he understood. Like I was trying to tell him, you have issues communicating, and it would get all mixed up in his head and he'd go on the attack. And it wasn't like he was like, oh, maybe I do have issues communicating. Maybe I do need to learn some communication skills, So that sort of thing are the big major issues that we kept trying to work out.
At this point, was he out of the pornography addiction?
He kind of quit fairly quickly. He quit we call it D-Day. The day I confronted him was June 15th of 2010. And he had quit back that previous May, but he calls his sobriety date July 4th because that's the day he stopped lying. That's how long it took for him, June 15th to July 4th, to really come out with a lot of the big things that he was trying to hide.
I see.
And so, the lying, that was another huge betrayal. And for me, the porn was one thing. It was a very small piece. The lying was another.
Of course.
That was harder because if he's going to lie about these little piddly things, he's definitely going to lie about bigger things, like an affair or, that sort of thing. But the place where I started really going mentally unstable was the area that I called everything else. And that is the blame shifting, the denials, the oh yeah, well but it also came from society. It's just porn. What's the big deal? Well, it's not just porn. It's lying, and he's looking for affairs and that sort of thing. And second guessing myself, doubting myself. I remember the first thing my counselor asked me, and that was, "How do you feel about it?" And I was like, "I don't know what am I allowed to feel here?" And she said, "You're allowed to feel whatever you want." I said, "I'm pissed. I am pissed. I want to scratch his face off that we're back here."
Wow.
And the problem was, though, up until then, I wanted to scratch my own face off because I kept hearing that it was my fault, but I couldn't do anything about it.
Wow.
You know, you hear this thing in 12-step groups. Everybody cleans up their own side of the street, which is fine in most relationships because they're two separate sides of the street. But when you become one, I could clean up my crap, put it away in boxes, but he was still dumping stuff on my side of the street.
Right.
You know, because my side of the street was his side of the street. So there were issues. Like when you're truly one, each other's issues affect the other.
Of course.
So we were doing that cycle of finding tools and then running out of steam with them, and then God giving us the solution for that problem.
It feels like, in a way, I'm picturing the metaphor of a hamster on a wheel, just running, spinning. It's like your marriage is confronted by all these issues and difficulties, and you're trying to work through this stuff, and it's just leads from one dilemma to the next, and it feels like at this point it's just really hard. You're not getting a lot of traction. And
yeah, we were. I mean, we had some long periods of goodness, of like really feeling, wow, I think we're in the clear. It'd be more like a hamster wheel, and then you just get exhausted, and then God lifting you up to another hamster wheel.
I see.
And you kind of sit there, and then you start pedaling again, and then tucker yourself out, and then God lifts you up to another one, and then the same cycle again. Or like a spiral up. You know, like if you could picture a tornado, at first we started at the bottom, and then up and up and up, and the further up we got, the more expansive our love became, you know, and the more healed we became.
Wow.
So after, I'd say, call it 3 to 5 years, after 3 years, we were really doing well. And then about once a year after that, for the next couple of years, we'd kind of do the same thing. It's just, it was on a year cycle instead of several months, you know. So after that 5 years, I'm like, hey, I think we're doing pretty good. I think we're going to be okay. And we had like 8 months of really good. I knew I was his one and only. I felt it in my bones. I felt like I could trust him again. And then he lost his job. And he describes why in in his episode, but he lost his job, and so he wrote out like 15 things that we were going to do, and this was the one that took off.
Helping other people,
yes.
Helping other marriages.
Mm-hmm.
Right, mm-hmm. Praise be to God.
Yeah.
Lori, I'm wondering if you could talk about when Jay was in the throes of his sex addiction and his porn mm-hmm. addiction, and you would catch him, mm-hmm. and he was lying to you, and then you'd catch him. Mm-hmm. Like, how did that affect you? Can you talk about how does that affect a woman? Why is that so hurtful to a woman's heart?
I think why it's so hurtful is because he's so sincere. At first, when I first found it on the computer, I took him at his word. I'll quit. I'm sorry. It was just a few times. I just stumbled back into that. And I took him at his word. And then the second time, same kind of thing. And every time he added, like, okay, now I will do this. You know, by the third time, it was now I will put blocking software on my phone and my computer. So those things gave me hope.
He was sincere.
Yeah.
He seems sincere in his
mm-hmm.
apology and his
right.
intention to be a better man. I'll never do it again. So you were trusting his words and his sincerity.
Right. And I think in those moments, the guys really are sincere because they feel very exposed and they hate that. They probably, I mean, I know Jay probably talked about not being able to look himself in the eye in the mirror. He didn't like that. He wanted out. And I think in those moments, the guy's like, oh, this might be my chance out. And so they explain everything that's been going on. And they feel better, like maybe I'll get free of it this time. I feel like this time I might get free of it, yet she's sitting there holding all the trash that he just dumped on her, you know, and then he might be free for a little bit. And he's like, hey, I've quit. What's your problem? Get over it. You know, I've quit. Why aren't you doing better? Well, the more betrayal cycles that happen, the worse it gets for her.
The trust is broken, yes. And because she can't trust him, she doesn't know that he's doing better. You say you're doing better, but how do I know that that's true?
Yeah. And typically the guys will use the same words they used before. Typically, there's not that big of a character shift in them for the women to know, wow, he's broken. He hit rock bottom. And I get now that God is building him back up. That typically doesn't happen very early in the process. So there's that piece of it too, that she can't trust. It's like, okay, but you're kind of showing up the same way that you used to. Like even just in normal life upsets.
Right.
So she's hearing his words and she's giving it hope, and he has a new plan, but she hasn't really seen character change or brokenness.
So how is this affecting you? You're going through this cycle. You catch him. He acts out. You catch him. He makes you these promises. I'll try harder. I'll do this. I'll use security software. I'll meet with the pastor. You try to believe him. He seems sincere. A period of time goes by. Then you catch him again. Then you catch him again. Then you catch him again. Like, what is this doing to your heart as this is unfolding?
Well, I just want to say that the catching stuff didn't happen after 2010 because he's been sober since then. But the catching him before was like, I knew something was up. I was right. We'd normally go through this hellacious fight, and then he'd be humbled, and then he'd be willing to hear me out and that sort of thing. And then we'd start that cycle all over again, because maybe now the new thing he's going to throw at this will actually work. So over time there, I got very hopeless to the point where I'm like, at 15 years in, God, if I'm going to stay, I've got to do this differently. I've got to do this differently. Then what happened was we'd try talking about it, and everything else would happen. And so the worst stuff would happen, And how did it affect me? It made me doubt my own sanity. It made me doubt my own senses. Like, am I seeing what I'm really seeing? Like I'd see him, we'd be somewhere, and he would track with a woman, who's good looking, his type.
With his eyes.
Yeah, with his entire head. He'd just track her. And I could tell. And then he'd turn to me and say, "I love you so much." I'm like, hold on a second. You're not going to tell me you love me after you check out a woman. I didn't check out a woman. Yes, you did. I just saw you. No, I didn't. I know I didn't. And so I'm like, those were a little easier to trust my own senses, but then I couldn't trust my marriage. I couldn't trust his senses. I'm like, if he's doing that when he's sitting right next to me, what is he doing when we're apart? So that's one of the impacts it had on me. It put me through early menopause, gave me stomach issues sometimes, insomnia. Some nights I would cry so hard I couldn't recognize myself in the morning, turn my hair gray early. I was 40 and had 75% gray coverage, my therapist or my hairstylist said. So,
Lori, that's significant. I mean, it speaks of a high level of stress and anxiety. Your physical body is being affected by this trauma.
Yep.
Your ability to sleep, your stomach, your hair. You went into menopause early. Like, holy cow. This is profound implications to what's going on in your heart and life.
Yeah. Yep. Was not fun. But it was worth it. I can say that it was worth it. I am a little concerned as to what that type of long-term stress, and then the stress of being entrepreneurs after that. I am concerned at what that's going to do to me long-term as far as like major illnesses. So I've had to kind of restructure my focus on these types of things, my focus on the business, how I'm a very fixing type person. Like, I know that there are solutions out there, and I know we can muscle a solution into existence. But I've had to get more quickly to the point where, you know what, I don't want that kind of stress. God, you're going to have to figure this out.
Right.
Because I live so much of my life in high stress that I can't keep doing that.
Lori, I want to mention at this point that you have a website that our listeners can check out. It's called pornpainhealed.com.
Yes. Yep.
3 words, pornpainhealed.com.
Yep. The full name is His Porn, Your Pain Healed, but that was way too long to put in a URL. So.
Yeah, I love that idea, though. His porn, your pain. And so your heart and your hope and your ministry is to speak to the women in the chemistry of these marriages. The man has an addiction, a sex addiction, a porn addiction. She catches him. He's had affairs. Trust is broken. She's devastated. She's traumatized. She's suffering from betrayal trauma. She's having these manifestations in her body, physical stress, upset. She can't sleep. She can't eat. I've had women tell me all these horrible things. They can't go to the bathroom. They have these manifestations in their body. This trauma is so bad. So the purpose of pornpainhealed.com is you're trying to bring resources and light and remedy and solution and guidance and wisdom for these women. How do you move forward in your marriage from this broken place of trust?
Right. Yeah.
Can this marriage be healed?
And first I focus on helping her to heal to the point where she knows she's going to be okay no matter what he chooses to do in his life. Because that's really the betrayal trauma approach is they work separately in order to get her through the first 2 phases of the trauma model, and then you bring them together.
Okay.
And so that's how we work with them. I'll work with her for anywhere from 4 to whatever months, and then Jay will work with the husband until we see signs that she's ready to see what's really, really important to him. She's ready to, because it comes off the rails when they start working together and start working on those 7 to 10 issues without his painkiller.
Right. Right. Because that's what's allowed him to cope.
Yep.
And once you take that coping mechanism away, then he's confronted with the reality of life and hurt and pain and confusion. And so he's really learning how to do life in a completely different way.
Right. So that's the approach we use. But I believe my specialty is definitely helping with the women, but also helping with the couple. And Jay's great at it too. He's got a 80% success rate with the guys, and we're batting about 90% keeping the relationship together, getting it to a much better place than when it arrived to us. So I do believe we've been given a calling here.
Lori, if I could interrupt, we need to bring this episode to a close. I see from the clock that our time is finished. So I want to invite you to come back for our next episode, and I want to talk to you more about this trauma model and betrayal trauma and how you help women in these situations. So thank you for being a guest today, and I'll look forward to our continued discussion next week. So guys, with that being said, we need to bring this episode of the podcast to a close, so we're going to do that. Thank you for being here today. I pray that this discussion has been a blessing to you, and I'm sure that it has been. I invite you to come back next week when we will continue our discussion with Lori Pyatt. In the meantime, check out her website, pornpainhealed.com, and I'll see you right back here next week. Be blessed. Have an awesome week. Have an awesome day. In Jesus' name. We'll see you then. Bye-bye now.
Thanks for listening. Visit powerofpurity.org for more resources and information. And if this podcast has been helpful or encouraging, please invite a friend to listen. Until next time, remember, there's power in purity.